Chapter 1. Shadows of the Past. Elena Moore's earliest memories were not of a warm home or the laughter of family, but of the cold streets of Blackstone, a city infamous for its crime and corruption. Born to a mother who worked nights to make ends meet, and a father who disappeared before she could even say his name, Elena had to learn early that the world was not a kind place. By the age of 10, she had become a ghost in the alleys of Blackstone, learning how to pick locks, steal wallets, and disappear into the shadows. Her mentor in this grim world was Victor Kane, a mid-level enforcer in one of the city's most notorious crime families, the D'Angelos. Victor was a hard man with scars to prove it, but he saw potential in the sharp-eyed girl with nimble fingers. "You've got instincts," he would say, handing her a switchblade. "Instincts are what keep you alive in this world." Elena quickly became a runner for the D'Angelos, delivering packages, collecting debts, and earning a reputation for being both clever and ruthless. By the time she was 16, she had graduated to more dangerous tasks, becoming a skilled thief and occasionally serving as Victor's backup during tense negotiations. But everything changed the night Elena made her first kill. It was supposed to be a simple job, deliver a message to a rival gang leader, one of the many petty disputes that kept Blackstone's criminal underworld in constant chaos. But when the meeting turned into an ambush, Elena was forced to act. Cornered in a grimy warehouse, she grabbed a discarded gun and fired, the echo of the shot ringing in her ears long after her target hit the ground. Victor found her afterward, sitting in a daze beside the body. "You did what you had to," he said, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Remember, it's kill or be killed in this life. And you, kid, are a survivor." The incident marked a turning point for Elena. Killing became a skill she honed with precision and efficiency, and she quickly rose through the ranks of the D'Angelo organization. By the time she was in her early 20s, she was one of their most trusted operatives, known for her icy demeanor and flawless execution. But as Elena's reputation grew, so did her disillusionment. The glamour of power and wealth faded, replaced by the harsh reality of betrayal, loss, and endless violence. She began to see the D'Angelos not as a family, but as a trap, a web she was increasingly desperate to escape. One night, after completing a particularly brutal assignment, Elena returned to her small apartment overlooking the city. She stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror, barely recognizing the woman she had become. Her once bright eyes were now cold and calculating, her hands calloused from years of wielding weapons. For the first time, she allowed herself to think about a life outside the shadows. But leaving the D'Angelos was easier dreamed than done. Victor had made it clear years ago. You don't just walk away. They either bury you or you keep walking until there's nowhere left to go. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted. A few months later, the opportunity for escape presented itself in the form of a rival assassin named Marcus Reed. Marcus was a freelancer, known for taking high-risk jobs and operating outside the crime family's control. He approached Elena during a rare moment of solitude at a quiet bar on the edge of town. "You don't belong with them," he said, sliding a drink toward her. Elena raised an eyebrow, her hand instinctively resting on the knife at her belt. "And you do?" Marcus chuckled. "I work for myself. No ties, no strings. You've got the skills to do the same." Elena scoffed, but his words lingered. Over the next few weeks, Marcus began to appear more frequently, offering advice, sharing stories of his independent life, and planting the idea that Elena could carve out a new path if she was brave enough to take it. But breaking away from the D'Angelos would mean more than leaving behind the only life she had ever known. It would mean turning her back on Victor, the man who had raised her in his own brutal way. It would mean risking everything. One fateful night, Elena made her decision. Under the cover of darkness, she packed a bag, gathered every piece of intel she had on the D'Angelos, and prepared to disappear. As she stood on the threshold of her apartment, she hesitated. The weight of her past pressed heavily on her, but the promise of a new future pulled her forward. With a deep breath, she stepped into the night, leaving behind the only world she had ever known. Chapter 2. Blood and Redemption. Elena Moore's escape from the D'Angelos was far from clean. By the time she disappeared into the night, the organization was already hunting her. She had stolen sensitive information, names, accounts, and locations, everything they wanted to keep buried. For weeks, she moved from city to city, using every trick she had learned to stay ahead of their reach. She changed her appearance, used forged identities, and avoided familiar faces. But no matter how far she ran, Blackstone's shadows seemed to stretch endlessly, threatening to pull her back. It was Marcus Reed who found her first. "You've got half the city looking for you," he said, stepping into the dingy motel room she had been hiding in. "You didn't just leave, you burned the bridge behind you." Elena looked up from the table where she was cleaning a pistol. "What are you doing here, Marcus?" He smirked, leaning against the doorframe. "Helping you survive. You've got a target on your back, and if you don't play this smart, they'll find you sooner rather than later." Elena studied him for a moment before nodding. "All right, what's your plan?" Together, they began to plot a counterattack. Marcus had connections in the underground world, allies who resented the D'Angelos' iron grip on the city. With his help, Elena started assembling a small network of individuals willing to take down the organization. But the D'Angelos didn't wait for her to make the first move. One evening, as Elena and Marcus were meeting with an informant in a rundown warehouse, an explosion rocked the building. The D'Angelos had found them, and a group of heavily armed enforcers stormed in. The firefight that followed was brutal. Elena moved with precision, her training and instincts kicking in as she fought to protect herself and Marcus. She took down enemies with calculated efficiency, but their numbers were overwhelming. As the smoke cleared, Marcus emerged from behind a stack of crates, clutching his side where a bullet had grazed him. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice strained. Elena nodded, helping him to his feet. But as they fled the scene, she realized something. This wasn't just about survival anymore. She couldn't keep running forever. If she wanted freedom, she would have to dismantle the D'Angelos from the inside out. The following weeks were a whirlwind of preparation. Elena used the information she had stolen to expose the organization's dirty dealings to rival gangs, law enforcement, and the public. She planted seeds of discord within the D'Angelos, turning their allies against them and weakening their power. But her boldest move was yet to come. Victor Kane had been like a father to Elena, but he was also the linchpin of the organization. Without him, the D'Angelos would crumble. She knew she had to confront him, not just to end their reign, but to confront her own past. The showdown took place in the very warehouse where she had taken her first life. Victor was waiting for her, his face a mask of betrayal and anger. "I should have known it would come to this," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You always had a streak of rebellion in you." Elena leveled her gun at him, her hand steady. "You taught me to survive, Victor, but I'm done surviving. I want to live." They circled each other, the air thick with tension. Victor made the first move, lunging at her with a knife. Elena sidestepped, her years of training guiding her movements. The fight was brutal and personal, a clash of mentor and protege. But Elena's determination outweighed Victor's experience. With one final move, she disarmed him and pinned him to the ground. "You were the closest thing I had to a family," she said, her voice shaking. "But you made me into this, and I'm done letting you control me." Victor smirked, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "You think taking me down will fix anything? The world doesn't work like that, Elena." She stepped back, lowering her weapon. "Maybe not, but it's a start." Elena left Victor alive, knowing that his capture would deal a more significant blow to the DeAngelos than his death ever could. She tipped off law enforcement, ensuring his arrest and the dismantling of the organization. For the first time in her life, Elena was free. She stood on a rooftop overlooking Blackstone, the city that had shaped her in ways both good and bad. Marcus joined her, his arm still in a sling from the warehouse fight. "What now?" he asked, leaning against the railing. Elena took a deep breath, the weight of her past finally lifting. "Now, I figure out who I am without them. I've spent my whole life in the shadows. Maybe it's time to step into the light." Marcus smiled. "Wherever you go, you'll have someone watching your back." She looked at him, her expression softening. "Thanks, Marcus, for everything." As the sun rose over the city, Elena walked away from the rooftop, ready to begin a new chapter of her life, a life no longer defined by the shadows, but by her own choices. Chapter 3. A new dawn months had passed since Elena dismantled the D'Angelo empire. Blackstone had begun to change. Without the iron grip of the crime family, rival factions had risen, but they lacked the cohesion and fear that had kept the city in a stranglehold. Law enforcement had finally gained some ground, using the information Elena had exposed to bring down key players. For Elena, the transition wasn't easy. Freedom felt foreign, almost uncomfortable. She had spent so long looking over her shoulder, surviving day by day, that she wasn't sure how to live without the constant threat of danger. But she was determined to try. Elena used the stolen money she had kept hidden during her years with the D'Angelos to start fresh. She moved to a small town on the outskirts of Blackstone, far enough to leave the chaos behind, but close enough to feel connected to the place that had shaped her. She rented a modest apartment and found work at a local community center, teaching self-defense classes to women and young girls. It was a small step, but it felt meaningful. One evening, as she finished packing up after a class, Marcus appeared at the door. His arm had healed, but he still carried the scars of their battles, both physical and emotional. "Still punching shadows, huh?" he teased, leaning casually against the doorframe. Elena smirked, wiping her hands on a towel. "And you're still showing up uninvited." Marcus stepped inside, his expression softening. "I've been keeping tabs on Blackstone. The city's better off without the D'Angelos, but it's not perfect. There's still work to do." Elena sighed, leaning against the wall. I've done my part, Marcus. I'm not going back to that life. He nodded, his gaze steady. I'm not asking you to. But you're good at what you do, Elena. And maybe there's a way to use those skills for something better. The idea lingered in Elena's mind long after Marcus left. She had spent years being a weapon for others, but what if she could be a force for good? What if she could help those trapped in the same cycle of violence and despair that had consumed her for so long? The next morning, she made a decision. Elena reached out to Marcus and a few trusted contacts she had made during her time in the underground. Together, they formed a small, anonymous network dedicated to helping those in need, runaways, abuse victims, and anyone trying to escape the grip of crime and corruption. Their first mission was small, helping a young woman named Kara flee from an abusive partner who had ties to one of Blackstone's emerging gangs. Elena and Marcus worked together, using their knowledge of the city's underworld to outsmart the gang and secure Kara's safety. As they drove Kara to a safe house, Elena felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced before. For the first time, her actions weren't about survival or revenge. They were about giving someone else a chance at a better life. Over the next year, their network grew. Elena became a mentor to those she helped, teaching them how to defend themselves, how to navigate the world, and how to rebuild their lives. She no longer hid from her past. Instead, she used it to create a future she could be proud of. One day, as she stood in the community center, watching a group of girls practice self-defense moves she had taught them, Marcus walked in with a stack of papers. "You're not going to believe this," he said, handing her a newspaper. The headline read, "Former crime syndicate turned savior. Mysterious network changing lives in Blackstone." Elena chuckled, shaking her head. "So much for staying anonymous." Marcus grinned. "You've earned the recognition, Elena. You've turned something dark into something incredible." She looked at the girls, their laughter filling the room, and then back at Marcus. "I couldn't have done it alone." For the first time in years, Elena felt truly at peace. The shadows of her past would always be a part of her, but they no longer defined her. She had found a way to step into the light, and she wasn't going back. As the sun set over the town, Elena stood outside the community center, watching the sky turn shades of gold and crimson. Marcus joined her, his hands in his pockets. "What now?" he asked. She smiled, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "Now, we keep going, one step at a time." And with that, Elena Moore walked forward, ready to face whatever came next.